I'd like to begin to let you know that we'll be having a little interchange back and forth, and I'll be demonstrating some of Bill's solos, etc. But first, I think I'd like to start things off by asking Bill how you started off to play the trombone as a young child in your house. Can you tell us about that, Bill?
Well, actually, my dad, Ralph Watrous, was a trombone player and actually worked, I would say, professionally in New York during what they called vaudeville, which was a heck of a long time ago. And did a lot of work there. This is long before I was born. The Depression came on, in which everybody lost their money. His father said, "Ralph, get your butt back here to Connecticut. You got to get out of there." And my father, instead of staying there and duking it out, came back up and went home to Chester, Connecticut, where he proceeded to get a job at the White Way Laundry. And that became his job for the rest of his life. And he did little gigs on the side. And I remember as a young man, hearing my dad play. He worked as a laundry manager of the State Farm for Women, which was in Connecticut. And they had a Christmas concert every year. And my dad would get up and play one of the Ave Marias and O Holy Night and stuff. And I was probably only about 4 years old. And standing there with these hardened prisoners, some of them have killed people, you know, and they're in tears listening to my dad play. And I'm standing there going, what the hell is that all about? I didn't understand anything of what was going on. Later on I did, you know, because it became obvious that this guy could play the trombone. So I started fooling around with the horns when he was off at work over on the State Farm, and I would mix them all up to be I'd mix a con slide with a King bell, and then a box slide with a Reynolds bell, and I'd mix them all up, and he'd come home and find peanut butter and Bosco all over everything. You know what Bosco is? You know what Comet Cleanser is, don't you? Well, it was like that, and the slide was ruined on it, so he broke down and got me a trombone. A Henry Diston. Now, I don't think anybody knows what that is, but they made silverware during the war. That's the Second World War, for anybody who's got a smart remark to make here. And all the horns were made, and the horn was really heavy. It wasn't nice like this one here, and it weighed probably about 24 pounds. And it was writing all over the bell, you know, like Our Country, Love It or Leave It, Mother, you know, all kinds of stuff here. And it had the worst slide in the history of the instrument, because the guy that owned the horn before, well, actually got the horn because his son, whose horn it was, went into service and lost an arm. And those of you who play the trombone know that you've got to have 2 arms to do this job. There's no way of getting around it. So my dad got this horn, and he had used jeweler's rouge on the slide. And it used to go, and you couldn't use a vibrato, you know, hand vibrato, and I said, you had to use fist vibrato. That was the attitude you had to take, because that's what you did. And my fellow students used to look over me and says, hey, Watrous, grind me a pound. So that was my first trombone. And the first thing that I learned was to play Warm and Wonderful. That's the first game. You know, and I have talked about that on all of my clinics for a long time now. That really is the most important thing.
Did your father play Warm and Wonderful? Is that where you first heard that sound?
Yes. Well, he didn't say like... My father didn't play jazz. He played razzmatazz, which is different, you know. Jazz from my dad goes... You know, very groovy, you know. But he played beautiful ballads, you know. And I used to really enjoy watching him play and listening to him and noting the reaction of the people who were listening to him play. And that impressed me. That enabled me to think about what the trombone was basically supposed to sound like, you know. Because there's all kinds of people that get strange sounds on the trombone. I've heard all kinds of ideas as to what it's supposed to sound like, you know. So I always figured out, what he did is use what they call a Tommy Dorsey vibrato from the beginning of time. You know, he would always be playing that. You know, very fast, almost like Tommy. And if you watch Tommy play, his vibrato was immediately right on the money all the time. Well, that's how the old man played, you know. As years went on, I took it and slowed that vibrato down to the point where I actually use it on the last third of a note. So now if I'm doing that tune, hell of a key, right? But you see what I'm doing. I'm actually waiting for the last third of the note for the vibrato to happen. And that works for me, pretty much. And all of my recordings that you hear, I use that technique.
All right, let's go on to give some examples of some transcribed solos of Bill. So what we're going to do is I'm going to play a little bit of a track with some description of what the song is, and then you'll be able to see his transcribed solo. Listen to a little bit of that, and then we'll discuss what he's doing in that solo. So this first tune, as you see, is called Mudslide Solly. Play some bebop. You know, in looking at the transcriptions, the way Bill weaves in and out of the chord progressions, choosing notes above and below the diatonic scale to create this weaving effect is very unique. And of course, Bill is a master at this technique at any tempo. Let's give a listen to Bill's solo on Mudslide Solly to hear his weaving, as I call it. And this is from an album titled Lazur that was released on Famous Store Records around 1980.
Well, for the record, you can't get this.
So when I first started working with Bill on doing some of these things, the idea how he kind of weaves in and out of the changes, I mean, obviously a lot of jazz players can do that, but nobody does it like this guy, right? So can you talk about that whole weaving thing you do, man? The weaver.
Actually, what he's talking about is a lot of people, for instance, young people, when they first start playing chord changes, get hung up with root, third, fifth, seventh, maybe ninth if it's a hot day, you know. But what is forgotten in there is all of the tones in between. And using those and being, this is what I used to teach my students at USC, is to actually use all of those tones in between. You know, somebody asked me, he said, do you use the pentatonic scale? I said, no, I use all 12 tones all the time, you know, rather than just sticking it on with just the four. I don't like to do that. For instance, if I'm playing a chord change, or any change, I like, for instance, that tune that we just listened to is in D minor, most of it, you know, instead of instead of just sticking with those notes, okay, we can go in between. You know, you can use all of those tones moving from place to place. What you have to remember is where the tune is going. If you keep that in mind, what I do is learn the melodies and where the actual tonal structure is of each tune that I do. And I don't get away from that. I stay in there and work with all of that at all times. You know? And that makes it easier. I've told, somebody asked me again, he said, oh, do you, I told you, do you use a pentatonic scale? I said, no, I use all 12 tones. And they're all there, you may as well use them, okay? And how you use them, that's up to you. Yeah.
How about we talk about a ballad? There's a tune here I'd like to show you and let you listen to called Sweet Face. And I think nobody gets the essence out of a ballad but Bill.
This, by the way, is my wife, Mary Ann. That's Sweet Face. It's a nickname I gave her a lot of years ago. You know. She still keeps it. You know. She doesn't hit me anymore. I like that.
This beautiful performance of Bill's composition, Sweet Face, is an example of one of the things he can do so well, and that is wring every ounce of sweetness and good taste out of a song. Focusing on the upper range of the trombone, he just doesn't get much better than this. Let's listen to Sweet Face from the CD Mad to the Bone with the Rob Stoneback Big Band. This CD is available on Stonequake Records.
You know, I didn't actually have, I was on a plane coming home from some devilish place I was at, and the tune sort of came to me while I was on that plane. It was about a 3-hour plane ride, and I didn't have a pencil or anything to write it down. I mean, it really just, you've heard about this happening. But it did. I said, you know what, I gotta write this down. So about 3 hours later, she picks me up at the airport, and I drive home, and I didn't even have any music paper. I had just a plain piece of paper, and I took and drew lines and wrote the tune down. And about 2 months later, I had organized all of the changes I wanted for this, and recorded it once before with a small group that I was playing with, Randy Drake and John Lightham, who's now Jennifer Lightham. And I've got a recording of that. The recording isn't great, but this one that we did here with Rob Stonebeck is a really good recording, you know. And I'm happy to have gotten that done. But it's amazing, if something is really important to you, you remember it. You know that? Some of you have kids, will tell them something, and a couple hours later, they don't know what you're talking about. But if you tell them something really serious, they'll probably remember that. Like, I'll kill you in an hour. They'll remember that.
I think you once used the word romantic to describe your ballad.
Yeah.
What's going on in your head? Can you talk about that a little bit?
What ballads are, and I get on it with people, the students that I've had, where they come in and they'll mess around with the melodic structure. And I can't live with that. I've got to hear someone who knows the tunes. For instance, I did a recording of music by Johnny Mandel on one of my CDs called A Time for Love. And the whole CD, I got on the telephone with Johnny Mandel, and he clued me in as to what is the correct way to go and play his tunes. One of the things, for instance, that everybody does is the end of one of his tunes, everybody screws up, oh, check this out. A lot of people go. That is wrong. So if you're playing Emily that way, there's just only one wrong, one note that's wrong. It's not da 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 da. Some guys go dee da da da, it's da da da. Little things they might not seem important, but for the guy who wrote the tune, it's very important. You know, you gotta have that.
I notice when you play something tender like that, the way you breathe, you keep the mouthpiece on your face, you don't take it away.
Never.
Is that unique to you, do you think?
Yeah. I have found a way to use rotary breathing. Oh, I didn't do it yet, and I'm going to demonstrate that in a second. Use rotary breathing without puffing my cheeks out. You know, people who do the circular breathing, you'll see them puff their cheeks out. But I've learned a way to do that and not do that. You can't see it happening here, but what I've done is open my throat up wide, and I take the air in there and move it back up. You know, tricky. You got to have, oh, let me tell you about this. In order to do this, you have got to have a nose. You don't have a nose, you know what's going to happen when you try to do this? You're going to suck your eardrums right to the middle of your head. I mean, I'll be there, and they're stuck. So now you got to go to the doctor, okay? And the doctor charges you, he puts a suction cup on, pulls them apart, and charges you about $2,000. So if you've had this problem and you don't have a nose, have a couple of holes drilled up like this, okay? Not down like this, because if it rains, you're in trouble. But it's the important thing is getting the air. And if you're going to do this, find a spot to do this. Don't wait until, especially you young players, don't wait until all the air is almost gone and try to cycle breathe. What you have to do is plan this. And it's one of the few things that I do plan. So I'm going to do this. I'm going to know about it 50% ahead of time. Anything past that is la-la land. You're not going to get anywhere with it at all.
All right, we're going to move on to a bop tune that Bill composed. It's called You Nut, but it's kind of based on the Miles tune So What, with just 2 minor chord changes. So let's see how he can work some magic with 2 changes.
Composed by Bill, You Nut is a modal tune with 2 chords, A minor 9 and B flat minor 9, similar to Miles Davis's So What. With only 2 chord changes, to me, a big challenge for the soloist in a tune like this is to maintain the energy and interest. I think Bill uses his range, chromatic patterns, along with harmonic and rhythmic tension and release as techniques to keep the listener's interest, and I think he succeeds very well. This is great solo development. The first chorus begins nice and relaxed, using 8th note patterns and a few rhythmic patterns that Bill develops. Notice the chromatic sequence in measures 29 and 30. This is classic Watrous. Chorus 2 has more chromatic sequences and the rhythmic patterns along with some upper end range. The tension and release effect is clear in chorus 3 as he takes the chromatic sequence idea further, weaving it in and out of the A minor 9 chord. Bill resolves back to the diatonic, creating the concept of harmonic tension and release. Let's give a listen right now to Bill's solo on You Nut. This track is from the album titled One More Time, originally released on Famous Door Records.
If you are someone who improvises, you know it's a lot of fun to play minor chords. And, you know, when you play like 4 or 5 chords, it's okay. And then all of a sudden, you might be running low on ideas. But how do you do it? How do you maintain the brilliant sense of time and the interest and the energy that you move forward with? How do you do it? What's the trick?
Well, I'm trying to create melodies over melodies, and this is very hard to do on a modal situation. But I've learned how to do that over that because I just don't want to play a bunch of what I consider basically boring modal stuff that you hear a lot from a lot of people. I try to be a composer every time I play. And if I, you know, and frankly, somebody might say, too many notes, Your Majesty, you know, which they might say. But I frankly don't care, you know, because I want to play what I feel and what I hear, you know. And I think if I can pull that off, I'm ahead of the game, you know. Because in playing modal tunes, you really have that scale, don't you? That you're dealing with, and you but you're always heading towards. I love to do that. I'm about ready to do a vocal album right now, in which I've picked out a whole bunch of things that I want to do. You know, I've been a big Chet Baker fan for years. You know, and Chet played when he played trumpet solos. He got into some of that stuff too. It's very interesting, you know. It actually simplifies things if you don't have to think about changes like the changes that are on No More Blues, Chega de Soledad. There's got changes every 4 bars. You're in a different place. You start in D minor, and you wind up in D major at the end of the thing. So that's a lot of responsibility. In modal playing, you don't really have to take it anywhere but that minor. Little pentatonic madness.
It makes it sound so easy. I'd like to do another example that's about a ballad. And this one is not an actual tune, it's a cadenza. And at the end of the cadenza, he does a little multiphonic. So check this one out, too.
A hot one for Jason is unique, and it's from a 1992 recording called Bonafide on the GNP Crescendo label. And in it, you play this dazzling cadenza. You demonstrate not only your unbelievable range, but the multiphonic effect with singing and playing a two-note chord. This transcription is written out of tempo to reflect the fact that there is no fixed time in a cadenza. The rhythms are grouped to reflect the various passages and thematic material. And how about that octave rip up to double high C?
So, as a musician myself, you know, if I'm in a situation where I need to play some sort of cadenza, you know, not that I have the whole thing planned out, but I have some predetermined ideas what I'm going to do, just, you know, to make it, at least to start things off with. Do you plan ahead, or is that just bang?
You know, if I plan ahead, I'm going to step all over myself. You know, no, everything comes. I never know how things are going to go. You know, when I start one of those cadenzas, I know one thing. I understand how I'm going to get into it and how I'm going to get out of it. I figure those things out in advance. I know, for instance, where I'm going to get in. I know that we were going to the key of C, which meant I was going to play a G7 when I got through, and that's exactly what I did. That's where we went after that, you know. But, you know, I know that, for instance, if I'm going to... That stuff is tough on the throat, you know. You will feel it then when you're trying to play those things, and you know, together, singing and playing to the same one. You almost have to borrow from Peter to pay Paul. In other words, if you're playing too loud, you can't match your voice to it. You know, so I have to be very careful about getting into that. If I get into it and I'm playing too loud, my voice goes right out of the park immediately. Another one that's weird is playing unison with yourself, which I've done a couple of times, which is equally difficult to do because it often doesn't work. You know. You know, it's not a great... You just have to be listening constantly in order to stay in tune to yourself. There's one exercise that I did one time, and I've done it a couple of other times, to demonstrate what happens when you're out of tune. I'm going to play an A natural, a low A, and I'm going to sing an A chromatic scale all the way down to that. And as I get closer to the tonic note, you're going to feel beats going like this. Because you're not, until you get in tune, those beats will do this. And when you're tuning up, if you're playing and you're playing with someone in this section and you hear those beats, say, somebody's wrong. Okay, so as I get closer to it, I should, if the Lord is with me, it'll line in a nice dead unison. Wait a minute now. Let's try it the other way. Let's try another. I know this is a disaster. As a guy, it'll finally lock in, but tears the voice up terribly.
Don't do that.
God help me.
I'd like to do one more quick tune and then a quick Q&A if you have some questions for Bill. And then Bill's going to play a little bit at the very end. And then I'm going to ask you to pass these sign-up sheets, and we'll have a little drawing for a raffle for a couple of these books, all right? So this next tune is one that I think is a great example of Bill's incredible time.
Next is Bill's composition, La Zora. In this tune, Bill demonstrates his ability to play extended eighth note lines that seem to go on forever with impeccable time. Let's listen to La Zora to hear those eighth note lines on Bill's time. This track is from an album called La Zora, and it was released on Famous Thorough Records in 1980. It's an up-tempo Latin with a halftime interlude.
My question is, do you practice with a metronome?
No, actually I don't. What I do is I use the Jamie Aebersols a lot. And I recommend them to everybody. You know, I've got the entire collection, everything, you know. And there's one of them in there called Burnham. And I will go through a couple of the tunes on there, and some of them are the tempo right there. It's an absolutely outrageous tempo. Oh, by the way, you know what I'm doing there? I'm going. That's what's going on.
All right, anybody have any questions for Bill they'd like to have answered? Questions going once? Here we go. Nice and loud.
Yeah.
So when you said you prepare for elongated cadenzas, you don't really think about what you're playing. What about a solo like we just heard? It's not a cadenza, you're in time. Do you practice ideas before playing something like that?
No. Because in fact, if you told me to take a look at what I had just played and play it again, I would refuse to do it. Because I don't think that way. I hear, what I hear, I play. You know? It's a lot more simple that way.
Any other questions? Yes. Mouthpiece.
Oh, I got a Bach Mount Vernon 11C, which I had when I was in New York. I got this, and what we did is in New York we had all the trombone players that played these had what they call a New York backbore. Don't ask me what it is, because I can't tell you. But I know that they open it up from here down to here. It's still just a standard, what they call a C drill opening. But it's just an 11C, you know. And I've got 3 of these, and some of them are in a little better shape, gold plating wise than this. But I'm scared to change, so I keep this one. Okay? Anybody
Anything
else?
else? Any other questions? Yes, sir.
Right there.
Talk about using vibrato with the Latin ballad.
Uh-huh. You calm down with it. You don't overdo it with a Latin ballad. Really. However, it's, you know, when you think about it, music is music, regardless of what it is. What ballad, for instance, you were thinking about? Oh, yeah, I did that on one of my CDs. Is put it on the very end of the phrase, rather than making it, you know, if it's the other way, then it's done. That doesn't work, because the Latins don't think in those terms at all. And if you want to know, Latin music, most all the Latin music is talking about love, all of it. Literally. So it's a warm thing. That part of that tune kills me right there. It's just so warm, and you know, I love Joe Beam, and I had the pleasure of performing with him and recording with him a bunch of times. I saw him get up. Remember, you know who Creed Taylor is? Yeah. Producer. Well, we were doing a recording of Rudy Van Gelder's in New Jersey, right across the river. And what happened was, Van Gelder, he used to do all of his stuff with a pair of rubber gloves on. And Creed Taylor, he came out. We did a take of one of Joe Beam's tunes, and Creed made him do 5 takes on this. Finally, at the end of the 5th take, he walks out of the booth looking at Creed with this look. And Joe Beam says, "Stop looking at me like that, Creed Taylor, or I'll sock you in your goddamn face." And Creed turned around and walked right back in the booth. Okay, next tune, you know. That was the end of that, you know. So I loved that. That was a nice experience to have. My warm-up and practice, it's all just simply long tones stuff. So just basically. You know, just on and on and on. In one place, this never moves off of the center, ever. If I can do that, I'm all set.